Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank everyone for coming today. And what I want to talk to you about today is something that is critically important but overlooked immensely. I want to talk to you about something that's probably not one of your favorite topics, and it's called estate planning. And the reason I want to talk to you about estate planning today is because the government has probably just made your wills and your trusts and the estate plans that you have in effect, they've probably made them obsolete. So I want to tell you why they're probably obsolete, and I want to tell you what you can do to potentially fix it. But before we do that, I want to make sure we're talking to the right group of people. I want to identify who should be doing planning. And my answer to that question is you. Yes, not the person next to you or the person behind you, you. Everybody in this room, everybody listening to this tape ought to be doing estate planning. Now let's take a look at some of the reasons why people do estate planning and some of the reasons why people don't do estate planning. So let's start with the positive. Why people do estate planning? Well, the first reason I could think of is because you can. Because it's available, it's out there, and it's something that you should do. So number one is you can do it, and number two is you should do it. The reason you should do it is because if you don't do it, the government is going to have an estate plan for you. It may result in taxes that you wouldn't otherwise have to pay. It may result in your hard-earned assets going to people who you wouldn't want otherwise to take those assets. And there are a whole host of other complications that can be avoided if you do plan. So people should plan. So that's reason number two. Reason number three is clients have informed us that after they do the estate planning, they feel a tremendous weight being lifted off their shoulders. It gives them peace of mind to know that they've taken this huge, important step in making sure that their loved ones and their family is taken care of. Because after all, think about it. Who do you care about most? You care about your family and your loved ones. And here you have an opportunity to engage in estate planning that's going to directly benefit the people you care about, and you have an opportunity to do it now. Not tomorrow, not the next day, not the day after. You should do it now. So those are three good reasons why you should do estate planning. Because you can, because you should, and because it's going to give you peace of mind. Now, let's think of some of the reasons why people don't do estate planning. Well, common reason I hear from people is, I don't have the time. I'm too busy. I'm planning my next vacation. I'm deciding what color car I'm going to get. I'm deciding what color carpet I'm going to get for my living room. We're redoing the house. The kids are busy at school. So there's a whole host of reasons why this is not going to rise to the top of the list. Reason number two, I don't know where to begin. This all seems so complicated, it's overwhelming. I'm like the deer in the headlights. So since I don't know where to begin, the easiest thing to do is do nothing. Reason number three, it's too expensive. I don't like dealing with attorneys and sophisticated financial people. That's always been intimidating for me. So I'm just not going to take the time to do it because it's too expensive and it's intimidating dealing with all these financial professionals. Number four, it's too complicated. I can't get my arms around it. I don't understand it. And because I don't understand it, I'm not going to do anything about it. And I'll worry about it until some other time. And the last reason is, when I think of estate planning, it forces me to confront my own mortality. Because let's face it, I'll be talking about the things that are going to happen when I'm dead or when I'm sick. And I don't know about you, but I'm not getting dead and I'm not getting sick, so I don't have to worry about estate planning. Now think about that. Some people actually think that they're going to be the first person in the history of the world who's not going to get sick or die. But I hate to tell you this, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but you're either going to get sick or you're going to die, or both might happen to you. Get sick and then die. So it is going to happen. Your family's going to be here and you're not going to be here anymore. So now the question is, what are we going to do about it? And why should we do something about it? Well, if you do nothing about it, I've already informed you that you'd be wasting opportunities to protect your assets from what I find are two of the very big bad evils out there. One is the tax man, and two are creditors. These are people who want your money, who want your hard-earned money, and there are things you can do to make sure that their interests in your assets are minimized. But you can only do it if you engage in the estate planning and you have a will and you have the other documents that you need. Now, the reason we're talking about all of this today is because the government has changed the playing rules. they've made a huge change in the estate tax law. And let me give you a little bit of history as to what we're talking about without getting too much into the legal mumbo jumbo. In 2001, the government repealed the estate tax effective December 31st, 2009. Now, nobody thought it would ever come to this where we'd be sitting here in 2010 and not have an estate tax. Everyone felt that as we got closer to 2010, and I was one of those lawyers giving speeches in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, and every year up until 2009, saying, well, the estate tax is supposed to be repealed in 2010, but Congress would never let that happen because it raises too much money, something to the tune of $30 billion a year, and certainly we can't afford to give up that amount of revenue. But sure enough, as we kept getting closer and closer to 2010, there was no change in the law. And when we got into December of 2009, all the commentators were writing that Congress was going to get together and they were going to come up with a fix, some type of amendment to the law that would prevent the estate tax from being repealed. But lo and behold, they were focused on other things, healthcare reform, the wars that we're fighting, and they just never got around to it. So January 1st of 2010, the federal estate tax was repealed. On December 31st, 2009, we had an estate tax with a top rate of 45%. January 1st, 2010, there is no estate tax. So somebody who died in 2009 gets to pay 45% federal estate tax, and if you die in 2010, there is no federal estate tax. Now, there's a lot of conflicting information coming out of Washington right now as to what we're going to do about this. Now that we've moved off the healthcare reform bill and onto other things, the estate tax is starting to get some attention in Washington. One of the fixes that we're hearing has a very, very high likelihood of succeeding. And again, there's no guarantee. I'm certainly not here to tell you that this is what's going to happen because we were all wrong about the estate tax not being repealed in 2010. But the thing that seems to be getting a lot of traction in Washington right now is to give people who died in 2010 prior to the enactment of this new law that they're thinking about enacting, is to give them the option of paying the estate tax or not paying the estate tax. You might be scratching your head. How many people out there, raise your hand if you want to pay the estate tax, if you don't have to pay the estate tax? Guess what? For most middle-class people, you'd be better off with the estate tax than not having the estate tax. And that's what the government doesn't tell you. There's a trap there for the innocent people like you who may not realize it. When they repealed the estate tax in 2010, they instituted a new capital gains tax on all your assets when you passed away. That capital gains tax can be, up to 20-30% depending upon what state you live in. But from a federal perspective, it's a 20% flat rate on your capital gains tax. Add in the state taxes, and it could be even higher. So these taxes are new because they were never imposed on assets that you inherited from somebody who passed away. So in other words, prior to 2010, if somebody died and you inherited their assets, you were able to sell those assets in the open market. Let's say it was a home or capital or stock or some other type of capital asset. You could sell it in the open market and pay no capital gains tax on the money that you received from selling those assets, so long as you sold it for the fair market value at the date of the person's death. So let me give you an example. You live in Westchester County. Your mom bought her house in 1960 for $50,000. She died in 2009. That $50,000 house is now worth $750,000. Probably not uncommon. That $750,000 was probably worth $950,000 or $1 million or maybe more 2 or 3 years ago, but now it's $750,000. You could take mom's house, sell it for $750,000, and pay no capital gains tax, even though mom only paid $50,000 for that house. So there'd be a complete elimination of the capital gains tax. If mom dies in 2010 and you inherit her house, you would have to pay capital gains tax on the difference between the $750,000 and the $50,000 that mom paid for it. So you pay capital gains on $700,000. Now, there are some exemptions to this capital gains tax rule where the executor is permitted to allocate certain basic exemptions. But again, I'm not going to get into the small print here on the tax law. Just understand that there are people who are going to be subject to this tax who otherwise would not have had to pay a capital gains tax. So what's happened is, instead of the rich paying the estate tax, you have the middle class paying the capital gains tax. Once Congress realized that this is what was happening with the quote-unquote repeal of the estate tax, that's when they decided they had to put in a fix, because that's not what was intended. What was intended was that Congress was going to raise the exemption on the estate tax. In 2009, the exemption was $3.5 million with a 45% rate. So if you're a single individual and you died with less than $3.5 million, you would not have to pay federal estate tax. Again, this was fairly misleading to most New Yorkers, because in New York State, if you have more than $1 million, you have to pay estate tax. So even though the federal limit was $3.5 million, the New York limit was only $1 million. And the New York state taxes can be quite significant. So many people drew up wills thinking that they had a tax-free estate because they had under $3.5 million. And then when they passed away, their heirs had to file an estate tax return with New York State and pay the estate taxes. So, that caused many people to not only focus on the federal side of things, but also on the New York State side of things. And with the way things are going in Albany and the budget crisis, I wouldn't expect the New York State estate tax to be repealed anytime soon. So the fact that we had a dichotomy between what the federal exemption was at $3.5 million and the New York State exemption was at $1 million led many people to have to redo their documents, because they didn't accurately reflect what the laws were at the time that they might pass away, because the documents were drafted many, many years ago when the federal and the state estate tax level were both at the same amount. And over the years, the federal one kept going up, and the New York State one stayed the same at $1 million. Now, with the federal one being at zero, and the New York State one at $1 million, we have the reverse problem, where you don't have to pay the federal tax, and you have a New York estate tax. So things have gotten complicated in the estate tax arena. We're hopeful and optimistic that Congress will come up with a fix that will treat people fairly. And as I mentioned earlier, the most fair treatment that we've heard is that people will get to pay the tax that results in the least amount of payment to the government, whether it's the capital gains tax or the federal estate tax. And that will be in effect for people who died January 1st up until the date of the enactment of this new law. Once the new law is in effect, then people who die after that date will be subject to the new provisions. And let me just try and take out my crystal ball here. And again, understand it's a crystal ball. It's not set in stone. The crystal ball says that the new law will unrepeal the estate tax and make an estate tax effective for people who die on or after this date, and that day will be around Memorial Day, is what I'm hearing now. But they will pay a federal estate tax of somewhere between 35 and 45%. That amount is currently being negotiated in Congress. One party is saying there ought to be a low tax rate, and another party is saying it ought to be high. So most commentators feel it'll be between somewhere at 35 and 45%. And with respect to the exemption, it's probably going to be around $3.5 million. One party wants it to be as high as $5 million. Another party is arguing for a lower amount. So what we've heard is probably going to be around $3.5 million for a single person. If you're married, you'll have an exemption of $7 million. So after this new law is passed, and again, we're optimistic it's going to be in a couple of months, married people with assets under $7 million will not have to pay federal estate tax, but they will still have to pay New York estate tax, because the exemption in New York State is still going to be just $1 million per person. So it's not going to be a free ride. Even if there is a fix on the federal level, there's still a very, very significant New York estate tax that you're going to have to deal with. One of the benefits that we found as a law firm, due to the fact that this estate tax law has been pending and that it's been in the news, been on the radio, it's been on TV, is that it's heightened people's awareness about the importance of doing the planning. So normally I would say to be in a state of disarray like we are, where you don't know whether it's going to be $1 million exemption or $3.5 million, you don't know if it's repealed, Normally that would be bad for planning, and it's bad for advisors, because frankly, a lot of times we don't know what to tell people to do because we don't know what the future holds. But one good thing about all of this is that it's forced people to actually think about this. So people who weren't otherwise thinking about doing estate planning in 2010, for all the reasons we said, I'm too busy, I don't want to deal with lawyers, I don't know where to begin, now all of a sudden have an impetus. There's something that pushed them over the line, the straw that broke the camel's back, and they have a reason to come in to see a lawyer because they want to learn about the estate tax changes. And while they're there, although we can't tell them with any degree of certainty what's going to happen with the estate taxes, we can talk to them about the importance of having a will, the importance of having trust to protect your assets from creditors, the importance of having a power of attorney so that people can make financial decisions for you if you become incapacitated, the importance of having advanced healthcare directives, so if a loved one of yours becomes ill and can't talk to the doctor, so that you can make decisions for him or her. All of these things are critically important, and we're thankful that people are coming in to talk to us, albeit for the estate tax piece, at least they're willing to listen to us when it comes to these other very, very important estate planning techniques that people ought to be thinking about to make sure that things are taken care of for themselves and the people they care about most. Thank you very much.